2 years later in a bar, people were enjoying themselves, until one man asked if his partner had heard any rumors. The other man immediately responded that if the rumor was about a mysterious masked warrior, then he was sure that it was all nonsense. But the other man quickly denied that the rumors were true. He then shared that one of his acquaintances had once been on a team with that person. The man also said that the man was adventuring with Jasmine Flamesworth, and he was quite short, so it was hard to ignore him. The other man was then curious about what his acquaintance was talking about. The other man then responded that there might be some truth to the rumor that the person was not a witch. However, the other man still insisted that it was nonsense. The rumors about the masked swordsman being an augmenter were exaggerated. He again asked if they had heard stories about that mysterious man. There were rumors that he was able to complete the dungeon by himself. That was highly unlikely because even a B-class augmenter could not do that even in a low-class dungeon. So he would not believe that an ordinary masked swordsman could do that. The other men also agreed that the rumors were too exaggerated. They should remember that he had Jasmine Flamesworth with him who would definitely help him in the dungeon. Another man agreed, and he said that the mysterious person could not be that strong. Half of the rumors were probably about Flamesworth, some foolish warrior called the man a swordsman. The man confidently asked anyone to bring the man there as he could definitely take care of it any time. The man then asked the waiter to add a drink. In the back of his mind, the man still did not believe the rumors about the masked swordsman that had been spreading for the past few days. According to some stories, the man was Jasmine Flamesworth's disciple. Even if the rumors were fabricated, it still didn't make sense that not only could she get a B rank in one exam, but she had also reportedly improved to an A rank recently. If the news was indeed true, then the man could rise to a grade within 2 years of starting his career. While he himself was a C-class frontier adventurer who had failed to advance in the exam for 3 years, he knew the news made Termin, who was a veteran B-class augmenter, feel upset. The rumor about the masked swordsman was definitely a point that tarnished his pride. Until suddenly the door of the bar opened and Arthur appeared there. Everyone was surprised, including Termin, who became very excited that the person he was talking about had finally arrived. He was curious if it was really the man who was said to be the little swordsman that everyone was talking about. The other men were surprised to see the masked swordsman's arrival. The person they were talking about, the cause of all the crazy rumors. He showed up at the club. Kaggle immediately asked about what Termin was going to do. Termin asked Arthur where Jasmine, the pretty little bouncer, had gone. However, it seems that Arthur just walked right past Termin. This, of course, made Termin upset because she had been ignored. Termin then laughed because even though Arthur was a bit more famous due to all the empty rumors, Arthur shouldn't think that he was better than Termin. The owner of the bar immediately asked him to calm down because he was not allowed to kill anyone in that place. Termin raised his sword and prepared to slash Arthur's head. Termin was already laughing widely because he thought his attack was successful. However, he was confused to see that Arthur was fine. It made him wonder if it was because Arthur dodged or because he missed. Arthur turned his head casually and Termin became even angrier. He attacked Arthur blindly with his sword, but the boy also easily kept dodging. An annoyed Termin asked if dodging was all Arthur could do, and that's when the hard slash happened. Termin's fingers simply fell to the ground, and a loud scream was heard from the man. Termin didn't think Arthur would dare to do that, but nothing came out of his lips. It was all his. Arthur had such a domineering aura. He asked Termin if he was done. Arthur then chose to leave, and the other man quickly asked someone to get an ice bag for Termin's hand. He was sure that he could still restore the condition of Termin's fingers with the help of emitters. Arthur then approached the waitress and asked if there was a sack of rations in Note's name. The woman fearfully replied and would get it for Arthur immediately. After that, Arthur casually walked out with the sack. At the front, he was awaited by Jasmine, who wanted to know why Arthur was taking so long. Arthur replied that it took the waiter a while to find the item. Jasmine then asked why there was blood on Arthur's mask. Arthur then takes off his mask and says that no permanent damage has been done. Jasmine and Arthur continued their journey by horse. During the journey, Arthur took the time to send a letter to his parents. He wrote that by the time they read the letter, he would probably be in a dungeon. Arthur knew that he had not visited often in the past few weeks and asked them to wait a little longer. Arthur also had no idea that 2 years had passed and that Lilia had also awakened. He knew Vincent must be very happy, but Arthur warned him not to go overboard in hiring a tutor for Lilia. Arthur reminded them to let Lilia train at her own pace before she entered Cyrus, although it feels strange because it means Lilia will be her senior at school. Arthur then says that he and Jasmine are doing well. She was even stronger than last time when she almost beat Reynolds in arm wrestling. Arthur also said that he had just broken through the light orange stage. Jasmine was also still helping him and teaching him everything she knew about wind magic. Meanwhile, Arthur teaches Jasmine some better sword techniques. Arthur also said that as he promised earlier, it would be his last trip as an adventurer before he enters school in a few weeks. Arthur promised to see them soon and told them that he loved them very much. After that, Arthur rolled up his letter and Jasmine asked if he was done. Arthur confirmed and said that the master said he would send the letter after the horse was returned to him. Jasmine knew that Roran had trained all the horses, so it would come back fine. Jasmine asked Arthur not to worry. Arthur confirmed that it would be much more dangerous for the horse to wait outside the dungeon for them. Jasmine knew that the team that would be exploring the dungeon would be waiting for them. She then asks if Sylvie is coming. Arthur explained that Sylvie was still communicating with him and she had grown smart enough to be able to send him detailed messages, but she still refused to meet until she was ready, whatever that meant. Jasmine thinks that Sylvie might be trying to get as strong as possible before Arthur goes back to school. She then urges Arthur to focus on their mission and hurry up. They finally arrive at the door of the dungeon where they are greeted by several people. A voice was heard saying that they would be trapped with more augmenters. Arthur turned around and it was Lucas who was there. Arthur didn't expect them to meet. Another voice then greeted the two who were the last registrants. The man said he was happy to meet the two. He then introduced himself and began by shaking Arthur's hand. The man could feel a strong, firm handshake from him, so he thought that all the rumors about the masked swordsman were true. He then introduced himself as Reginald Bastogne, who was a Class A augmenter with a solid yellow core land attribute. Then he introduced Lucas Wykes, who was familiar to them. He was a Class A dark yellow conjurer specializing in fire. Then there was Creel Masser, a water attribute conjurer who became their tank. Then she wanted to introduce him to a man whose name they didn't know. Another candidate who also occupied rank B at that time. The man finally introduced himself as Elijah Knight. He was a Class A dark orange conjurer with earth specialization. Then the other man introduced himself as Oliver Hembit, who was a Class A stage dark yellow conjurer emitter deviant with a specialization in healing. Arthur thought the guy was a bit arrogant, but was lucky they had emitters. Meanwhile, a girl introduced herself as Samantha Tempest, who was a Class A stage dark yellow with a water specialist. She then approached Arthur and claimed to have heard a lot about the masked swordsman Lord. She hoped Arthur could take care of her. The last man was Brauld Landon, who said he was happy to meet them all. He had just become a light yellow stage AA class and an augmenter with a fire attribute. He was also their leader for the day. Brauld then asked if Jasmine and Arthur had anything to say. Jasmine then introduced herself as someone in the light yellow stage, an AA class augmenter with the wind attribute who wielded 2 swords. Brauld said he was happy that there were other AA classes in the group. Arthur then introduced himself as a note who was at the light orange stage, a Class A augmenter with a fire attribute. Samantha was surprised to learn that Arthur had a fire attribute because from what she had heard, he did not have elemental powers. Arthur revealed that he just hadn't used his magic for a while for personal reasons. Brauld watches the two and realizes that they are still holding on to each other's things. He asked if they didn't have dimension rings, and both shook their heads. Brauld asked if Lucas could lend them one, but he quickly asked him to ask Oliver and not him on the pretext that his possessions were full. Oliver also says that he already has Samantha's stuff with him. Elijah then said that he still had room at his place. Brauld was certainly relieved to hear that. After that, Elijah absorbed his second item with a ring in his hand. Arthur mused that he wasn't surprised Lucas had a dimension ring, but he didn't expect Elijah to have one too. The technology used for the dimensional ring was a relic of the ancient wizard who made the city levitate in Cyrus. Even the dimension ring with the smallest storage capacity cost thousands of gold. After finalizing everything, Elijah asked if all their items were in, and Arthur confirmed. He then thanked Elijah, which made him blush. Brauld, who felt that they were ready, finally entered the dungeon together. The group traveled further into the dungeon. Brauld told them that they were almost at the first floor of the dungeon, and asked them to stay alert. Lucas looked around, and was annoyed that there were no beasts there at all. They continued walking until a rock fell from above, which made them all turn their heads. Brauld looked up and realized that there were so many monsters above. He called out Baytrunners, which made Oliver look up as one monster tried to attack him. Jasmine immediately gave instructions for Oliver to duck, and immediately slashed him with the sword. Creel immediately attacked, and so did Brauld, who asked them to make a formation. Oliver immediately cast the resilience augmentation spell. One by one, they began to attack. Reginald attacked with his weapon, as well as Elijah with his wind power. Brauld then reminded his teammates that their goal was not to kill monsters, so they should be able to save each other's mana. Lucas then attacked with a fire typhoon move that destroyed all the monsters inside. However, Brauld got angry at Lucas because he disobeyed his order not to waste mana excessively. Brauld asked if Lucas knew what kind of dungeon it was. However, Lucas dodged and said that it didn't matter at all. He had killed all the monsters quickly so everyone could save their mana as well. Brauld reluctantly commented and asked them to leave before the monster stood up again. The dungeon was famous for its mysterious inhabitants that had escaped the grasp of death and could no longer be killed, with no mana cores that could be generated by adventuring, and no end to feudal battles. It made sense that the dungeon's first explorers would name it the Graveyard of the Macabre. They then continued walking. He said that the dungeon was where he had marked the secret entrance that he had found that time. Arthur was relieved that this was the purpose of their visit to the cursed dungeon. Brauld then asked Elijah to make a foothold, and he easily did so. Brauld began to climb, followed by the others. They finally arrived all at the top. Brauld then said that he only made it to the next floor before he decided to return with the team. He also felt there was no need to reveal what was at the bottom, but he believed that the artifact responsible for waking the Baytrunners back to life was probably there. Creel then said that as long as he got his fair share from the sale of the treasure they got from down there, then he would have no problem. Brauld, of course, did not mind. Therefore, they finally continued their journey. The group resumed walking, and as soon as they reached a point, a weapon was launched at Samantha, and Arthur quickly dispatched it with his sword. Samantha was shocked, and so was Reginald, who asked why Brauld didn't warn them about the traps there. Brauld then replies that there were no traps when they came there. Oliver asks Samantha if she is hurt and if it needs to be healed. Samantha is evasive, saying that she is fine. Just then, Arthur picks up the sharp object that previously attacked Samantha and realizes that it wasn't a trap, but a mana beast. Everyone is naturally surprised, and Brauld reminds them to stay alert. Afterward, they resumed walking, but this time they were more careful. They continued walking until they finally reached their destination. But Brauld realized something was wrong. Lucas asked if it was because it was warm there, unlike the last time Brauld visited, which was clearly an insinuation. Brauld admitted that this was not the case. Apparently, Arthur could feel it too. It wasn't from the burning heat, but from the intense pressure that overflowed from within. They went deeper and then felt the ground begin to tremble. Reginald wondered what else was going on, and Brauld said he didn't know. But suddenly, a huge monster came out of the ground. Oliver was terrified to see the monster. Meanwhile, Brauld immediately called Creel, who immediately cast magic to protect them. Creel asked if the creature was there before, and Brauld said that it didn't exist before. Creel felt that it didn't make sense for a new species of mana beast to enter the dungeon like that. Brauld noticed the creature's arrival again, which didn't seem to target them. Elijah also said that it didn't seem to be chasing them. Arthur watched in silence. Oliver then asked if they would just stand there and watch the worms digging or go look for artifacts. Brauld asked Oliver, who walked away, to come back. However, Oliver casually asked Samantha to follow right behind him. He claimed to have little patience for the others. He would be happy to protect her, but Samantha felt that it was not a good idea. Brauld also said that they needed to assess what was happening before they went further into the cave. Brauld yelled for Oliver, but the man kept walking in. They walked slowly again, and suddenly Arthur told Lucas to take out the heatwave shield. Meanwhile, Arthur quickly grabbed Brauld's clothes and ordered Lucas to do it right then and there. Lucas followed orders. Arthur also yelled at Oliver, but suddenly a huge explosion occurred. They all survived thanks to the heatwave shield, but not Oliver. Meanwhile, Samantha, holding back her grief, unleashed the power of protective water. The condition improved. Everyone was very surprised to see the condition of Oliver's body, which was burned to only bones. Oliver was already baked to the bone, and there was nothing they could do about it. Arthur walked over and picked up the green gem and gave it to Samantha. Arthur asked Samantha to put the gem on her wand to strengthen her magic. Samantha accepted the gem with a sad face. Arthur invites them to leave immediately. Brauld stood up and said that Note was right. They had to get out of that place before there was another eruption. They all ran down the cave, but a huge giant worm appeared in front of them. Blart asked Creel to come forward. The big man creates a protective shield of water that can withstand the worm's attack. Samantha and Elijah were the next to step forward and attack the worm using their magic. Samantha attacked with water magic while Elijah attacked with earth magic. Eliza tried to restrain the big worm's movement with the earth that bound her body. Brauld looked annoyed that Elijah's earthen attack couldn't even scratch the big worm's body. So Brauld asked Jasmine and Reginald to come forward with him. With fire wrapped around his sword and body, Brauld planned to attack the big worm directly. Brauld and Jasmine would keep the worm busy while Reginald was asked to aim between the eyes of the worm. They both understood Brauld's orders, so the three of them advanced together. If that wasn't enough to bring down the monster, then Lucas and Note would find an opening to attack it. The three of them jumped together to attack the big worm. Brauld tried to burn the worm's body while Jasmine cut it with a sharp wind. Then Reginald looked for an opening to attack the worm's head. Lucas stood watching the game with a pale face. Apparently, he was getting scared. Lucas thought a normal fire spell wouldn't be strong enough to hurt the worm, so he thought his fire attack should be hotter. Before Lucas could attack, Arthur advanced at lightning speed with his fire-coated hot sword. He tried to find an opening and cut some teeth from the worm monster. As the worm monster starts to get overwhelmed, Arthur asks Jasmine to deliver the fatal blow right now. Jasmine jumped with the windstorm at her feet to strike right at the head of the big worm. As the big worm had received a sizable wound, Brauld asked Lucas to deliver the attack now. But Creel suddenly asked them to wait as the worm escaped by going into the ground again. After the worm left, Brauld thought that it was now safe and invited them to leave. The blonde-haired man praised the hard work done by Jasmine. Lucas complains that it was all they had to do to scare off the big worm. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet shakes violently. Arthur realizes the worm is not trying to kill them, he is just buying time until the next eruption. Sure enough, the next eruption was about to happen. Creel moved quickly by hugging Elijah's body and protecting them both with his large shield. Reginald protected himself with the earthen shield he created, while Brauld ran towards Samantha to protect her from the magma. Meanwhile, Arthur would be under the protection of Jasmine's wind shield. But a few seconds before the eruption, Arthur saw Lucas without protection. So Arthur immediately ran away from Jasmine's protection and created a fire shield to protect Lucas from the magma eruption. When the magma erupted, coming down towards them, everyone managed to survive in time. But even though Arthur had helped him, Lucas didn't feel like he owed him anything. Instead, he pushed Arthur out of his way. When Arthur looked at the other members, he was astonished to see Brauld. It turned out that the adult man's right arm did not survive the eruption this time. The condition of Brauld's right arm, which was cut off in a gruesome way right in front of his eyes, successfully made Samantha dumbfounded with a pale face. Soon everyone was frantically trying to help Brauld treat his wounds. Reginald and Creel tried to hold the big man's body while asking him to hold on, because Arthur was going to cut the rest of the wound to make it tidier. Arthur asked them to keep Brauld stable. Undeniably, a tough warrior like Brauld cried with hateful tears on his face as he had to undergo mutilation without any anesthesia. Moments later, when the wound was successfully cut and cleaned, Samantha tried to ease Brauld's pain. Everyone was sad for Brauld. As Arthur sat pensively in the cave, Creel approached him and handed him a large sandwich. Creel asked Arthur to enjoy the food as it might cheer him up a bit. Creel explained that it was a special sandwich that he had saved for him to eat when he was feeling down during his adventure in the dungeon. Arthur thanked her for the special sandwich. Creel explained that the best way to eat the sandwich was to burn the inside a little to melt the cheese inside. Arthur opened the sandwich and tried to melt the cheese with his own little flame. This sight made him really tempted. Then Creel asked Arthur to melt the cheese too. They enjoyed the sandwich together. Arthur admits that the sandwich tastes better when the cheese is burnt. Creel explained that it was her fiancé who had invented the recipe, including how to dry and season the beef in the sandwich. Arthur said that Creel was a very lucky person to have her fiancé. He told Creel to convey his gratitude to his fiancé for the delicious meal. With a happy smile, Creel replied that she would definitely convey her gratitude to her fiancé. Suddenly, Reginald shouted for two people to stop arguing. In front of them, Lucas, the arrogant boy, was blaming the injured Brauld. Lucas said that the only reason he joined this trip was because the leader of the team was a Class AA veteran wizard. But now not only was the team leader handicapped, but they had even lost an emitter. Brauld was not to be outdone. He didn't want to be blamed by the boy who dropped his gun, so he was saved by note. Lucas loudly said that he had tried to control the situation, unlike Brauld, who couldn't even protect himself in time. Brauld explained that he had to protect Samantha, which he didn't even have to do if Lucas had stayed alert and put up the barrier in time. As the two of them were getting louder and louder, arguing and shouting at each other, suddenly Note asked them to stop with a very deadly dark aura. The first person to be reprimanded by Arthur was Lucas. He thought the noble boy had no brains. Lucas was immediately provoked. He walked towards the Note with a spicy mouth that continued to rant. Arthur calmly stated that he didn't care if Lucas was in the yellow core, silver core, or even if he was a god, because right now all these problems are happening because of Lucas' lack of ability. Being blasphemed right in front of his face, as well as being suppressed by Arthur's lethal aura, made Lucas upset and chose to walk away from them all while banging his shoulder on Arthur's shoulder. After things had calmed down, Reginald told Brauld that he would take care of his wound for now, so he asked his partner to rest first. Arthur approached Brauld, then politely said that the blond man had to make a decision before they moved. Reginald had some burns and his wounds were treatable. Arthur and the others were okay, but Brauld's wounds were very severe. Note reminded Brauld to make a decision whether he wanted to continue the mission or not. Brauld gritted his teeth, then with a serious face said he would continue this mission, even though this would be his last trip, but he would continue until the end. Samantha was very surprised to hear the man's decision. She asked frantically how Brauld would fight with one hand. Brauld replied that he was still a Class AA augmenter after all. He sure won't hold anyone back, but he thinks Note should lead the group from now on. Because he saw, Note was the most level-headed person among all of them, even in the face of unexpected events. Arthur turned to all his team members to ask what they thought of Brauld's decision to make him the leader. Everyone nodded in agreement. So Note should accept this task. He sighed heavily before deciding that they would rest for an hour before moving again. After 1 hour of rest, they started moving at a leisurely pace. When they arrived in front of a passage, Brauld was surprised because it was different before. The tunnel had never been blocked before. Reginald explained that there was no point in complaining about this difference. Then, without further ado, he immediately hit the barrier in front of him using his large hammer. The very hard blow only created a small mark. Reginald did not give up. He tried to open the barrier again using a stronger earth element technique. Despite being hit so hard, the barrier was only scuffed again. Reginald was getting annoyed. Jasmine went over to him and prepared with a windstorm in her hand while asking the big man to try hitting again. This time they would combine forces to hit the barrier. Jasmine used the power in her wind to push, and then Reginald's large one. With such a powerful combination of forces, the barrier in the hallway was finally removed. Bright light streamed out of the room. Everyone was shocked at the sight before them. The cave was full of beautiful natural scenery. Various green plants filled the place. Arthur realized there weren't any pillars to hold the place up. It was as if they were not in a cave. Everyone was amazed by the scenery in that place. Even Samantha was mesmerized by the beautiful flowers. Even so, some of them could still feel something strange. Creel invited them to rest for a while in that place because he was starting to feel a little sleepy. But Arthur decided that they would not stop because he sensed something was wrong in that place. Arthur asked everyone to keep their guard up. Creel asked if it was necessary as he didn't hear anything or see anything other than grass and trees around the place. They continued to walk around the place but still didn't find anything strange. Even so, Arthur still felt that there was something about the place that made him feel very worried. But he didn't know what it was yet. The young man realized he seemed to have missed something. Amongst the thick fog, Jasmine saw a man coming towards her with both arms outstretched and smiling. For a moment, the girl was mesmerized and almost lost consciousness. Fortunately, she soon came to her senses and was shocked to realize that she had just been caught in an illusion. Jasmine turned to her surrounding companions. She saw Creel, who was transfixed with blank eyes. Creel called out Clara's name with a cheerful face. Reginald was shocked to see his big-bodied colleague suddenly put out his hand and shouted Clara's name loudly. When Reginald turned to him to ask if he was okay, Creel suddenly ran into the thick fog while shouting that he would immediately pick up Clara. Everyone was immediately shocked and turned their heads in the direction of Creel's departure. Arthur moved quickly to ask everyone to stop and not follow him. Jasmine also said that the fog had created an illusion. Arthur now realizes that it was the fog that made him uncomfortable. Arthur asks everyone to stay together as the mist is playing with their senses. The young man asks Samantha to protect them immediately. The magical girl casts a spell that creates a barrier of water that instantly shields them from the fog. Here, Samantha asked who was the Clara that Creel had summoned earlier. Reginald and Brauld looked at each other with sad faces. Then Reginald explained that the girl was Creel's fiancée. But there was no way that girl was still alive because she had been killed in the dungeon before. They saw the girl's death themselves and even saw when the girl was cremated and her ashes were burned. Reginald says they must find Creel, who is lost in the fog. Lucas complained again that this trip was not going according to their plan. Once again, the arrogant boy questioned whether they were really veteran adventurers, because they had several incidents where they got injured and even lost their team members. On seeing Jasmine's gloomy face, Arthur asked if she was okay. Jasmine shook her head and said that she was just a little shaken up. Arthur guessed that the girl had also seen something. Jasmine replied that she did not see something but someone. It was her father reaching out to her with a smile, something she had never and could not have gotten since childhood. Arthur tried to calm the girl down while holding her hand. He guaranteed Jasmine would be fine. Now, Jasmine is calmer and can smile as she looks at Arthur. After this, they now have to deal with the fog. Arthur asks if Jasmine has a spell to get rid of the fog. Jasmine replies that she has a spell that is not powerful enough to clear all the fog, but she believes it can create a way to find Creel's whereabouts. Jasmine quickly put away her 2 small swords and prepared to create a windstorm with her hands. It was at this moment that Arthur asked Samantha to open the barrier for a moment. Jasmine focused on using most of her power to move the wind through the thick fog before them. When the fog cleared before them, everyone was astonished at the sight of the thorny bushes that stretched along their path. Arthur didn't expect them to be unaware of such a large garden of vines in the mist. Moreover, the plants were not affected at all by Jasmine's spell. Arthur realized the creepers were coming at them fast, so he quickly gave Lucas the time and space to show off his plant removal skills. Lucas yelled in response that Arthur didn't need to order him around like that. Lucas raised his staff high while chanting an incantation to shoot fire and burn the vines. Unexpectedly, the fire created by Lucas was extinguished in no time. This surprised everyone since both the spell and what Lucas created were quite large. Arthur realized this adventure would not be easy. He immediately asked Reginald to protect the conjurer as they prepared more powerful spells. Meanwhile, Jasmine and Brauld will go forward with him to penetrate the plant wall that looks very suspicious. The 3 of them advanced together against a group of very suspicious vines. Jasmine advanced with her ever-present windstorm. Brauld was still agile with his ever-present red firestorm, while Arthur advanced with his blue fire. Every time, Arthur managed to burn every vine that came his way. The plants managed to regenerate quickly. He suspected that they didn't burn because of the moisture inside them, so he tried to attack the deeper parts. Sure enough, this time the plants had trouble regenerating. Arthur was happy that he had found a way to stop the plants from regenerating. Arthur turned to Brauld to tell him this technique, but instead he saw the man madly burning all the plants in front of him while shouting that he would not give up just because of the giant plants. Arthur cursed inwardly as he realized the grown man was turning crazy and reckless now. Arthur looked at Jasmine and realized the girl was still fighting calmly. Arthur was happy because Jasmine was still calm and didn't need his help. So Arthur ran towards Brauld. Right at this moment, Brauld's body was caught by the vines. His entire limbs were bound by the plant so that he could not strike back. Arthur came and cut off the entire plant. Arthur asked when Brauld had said that this would be his last adventure, did that mean that he planned to die in that place? If not, Brauld would have to fight cleverly, because they still needed Brauld. On the other hand, Lucas drank a bottle of elixir before using his fire magic again. Now, Lucas could create a burst of fire large enough to burn the pile of wild plants in one go. Arthur and the others immediately retreated when Lucas used this technique. Arthur realized the spell Lucas was using was weaker, but it was very flammable and spread when it made contact with the plants. From this, Arthur realized Lucas could still think clearly. But one of the vines targeted Elijah, the figure at the very end, and escaped their notice. Just as Elijah was about to be attacked, Brauld appeared to save him by cutting the vines. After that, Elijah nodded his head in thanks to Brauld. Elijah immediately used his power to destroy the ground around them, until it was impossible for the vines to get water. Arthur thought that the destroyed soil and the burning liquid fire should make it difficult for the plants to regenerate. Plus, with the spell Samantha cast, they should have enough time to find Creel's whereabouts. Samantha cast a few spells to draw water from the plant. Water siphon is a spell that is usually used to gather water around, but Samantha could use that technique to dry the vines before them. When the vines were dry, Samantha's body suddenly fell down, but Arthur managed to catch her. Arthur didn't expect Samantha to be able to use the spell in this situation. He thought it was very good work. Arthur smiled happily at the girl, but suddenly the mist around them moved very quickly to enter the vines. Then, in no time at all, the plant was refreshed. Everyone was very surprised that their onslaught had been unsuccessful. Arthur realized the plant was absorbing the mist because of their spell. As Arthur looked at his comrades to invite them to escape, he saw everyone staring up behind him. As Arthur also gazed up, he too was dumbfounded with a terrified look on his face as he realized a monstrously sized plant monster was standing tall right behind him. Arthur was so shocked and frightened that the sword in his hand almost fell out. With its huge red eyes, the creature stared at them all. Samantha fell to her knees with a very pale face. She hadn't expected them to have to face the creature. In a nervous voice, the girl said that she had only ever seen the creature in books, because it was the legendary guardian of Elderwood. Brauld smiled sadly, realizing the god really didn't want them to live. Hearing the man's words made Arthur realize he had given up. Reginald also did not believe in the appearance of the creature. He thought it was all a joke because there could be no Class S mana beasts in that place. As they looked more closely, they saw Creel's helpless body right in the center of the chest of the terrible monster. Everyone was dumbfounded at the horrible condition of Creel's body under the monster's control. The beast began to attack them with its arms full of thorny plant tendrils. Reginald refused to back down. He screamed Creel's name while crying. But it was the monster that answered him with a scream that was no less terrifying. Reginald's body was burning. He would risk everything to save his good friend. Arthur tried to warn the big man for the fact that they would not be able to fight against the legendary creature. But Arthur's attempt to stop Reginald was unsuccessful as they were repulsed by Reginald's elemental energy. Fortunately, Arthur's body was not destroyed as Elijah managed to capture his body with his earth element. Jasmine screamed in panic at the sight of Note being pushed away like that. Reginald was still screaming as he used all his energy to gather the surrounding earth into an armor that covered his entire body. The plant monster moved to attack Reginald, but Note immediately asked Elijah to protect him. The bespectacled youth moved as fast as he could to create a wall of earth to protect Reginald. Now the attack from the monster could not penetrate the barrier created by Elijah. In this tense moment, Jasmine pulled Arthur's hand and asked him to leave right now. Arthur asks her what about them, because right now Elijah's body is almost at its limit. He was starting to get nosebleeds, which meant he could no longer hold the earthen shield. Arthur couldn't leave them because he had promised them. But Jasmine was close to tears when she said she also had a promise to Arthur's parents to bring him back safely. Suddenly, a huge explosion was heard as Elijah's protective wall was destroyed by the monster. Jasmine hung her head in tears as she said she promised Arthur's parents to keep him safe. Reginald, on the other hand, was ready. His entire body was covered in earthen armor, so he challenged the giant monster to come forward against him. While they were fighting desperately like this, of course, Arthur could not leave them. Arthur grasped Jasmine's hand back, saying that they would leave, but not in this situation. Then Arthur slowly let go of Jasmine's hand, saying that they could not leave the team members under these circumstances. Finally, Jasmine could not persuade the young man. She sighed heavily and followed Arthur forward to help Reginald, who was advancing alone against the monster. With an enormous and powerful plant arm, the creature attacked Reginald. But the big man was not to be outdone. He used a sword from the ground to cut off the plant monster's arm. The creature didn't lose its way. It used plant tendrils to attack the other members. Everyone was pushed away and brought down by a single attack from the creature. Right in front of the creature, Reginald was still struggling alone to cut off every plant monster arm that came at him. Eventually, the monster managed to capture him and restrain all of his movements. Arthur tried to help the rest of the team get out of the place. He asked Elijah to protect Jasmine as she was about to take Brauld. After that, he asked Elijah to run to the exit immediately. While maintaining a protective wall, Elijah replied obediently. Suddenly, the plant monster roared loudly as it managed to gain energy from Reginald. Everyone was dumbfounded looking at the monster. Arthur tried to find a way to free Reginald by asking Lucas for help, but unexpectedly, the arrogant boy had already pointed his huge magic wand right at Arthur's chest. Right after Arthur finished speaking, he was shot with a fire elemental large enough to make his body flung far enough. Of course, this betrayal from Lucas left everyone shocked. As Lucas fell and took several hits from the monster, he saw that the exit was quite close. Lucas looked back and realized everyone was trying to save themselves. Instead of having any intention of helping them, Lucas thought that he belonged to the great Wykes family. As one of the keys that led the country of Sapin to victory against Eleanor, it would one day be his duty. The boy grabbed his wand, stood up and pointed it right at Arthur's body. Lucas thought he had to stay alive and continue his bloodline. That's why he would sacrifice Arthur and the rest of the team. Arthur's body was thrown so far that all his clothes were torn off, and his mask was broken. Everyone was shocked at how much damage Arthur had received from Lucas. As Jasmine ran to Arthur, Lucas yelled at her to back off. Then he mercilessly targeted them too, sending Jasmine's body flying. Fortunately, Elijah was perceptive enough to create a shield from the ground and hold Jasmine's body before the girl's body was captured by the plant monster. On the other hand, Brauld's large body was also pushed away, but once again Elijah managed to catch him, keeping his shield up. Elijah prepared to protest to Lucas, but it turned out that the arrogant boy had already pointed his magic wand at Elijah. Lucas asked Elijah not to do anything futile if he didn't want to be blown up. With a face full of anger, Elijah asked what Lucas was doing. Without guilt, Lucas said out loud that he would not risk his own life and then help commoners like them escape from that place. But they will all go down in history as brave heroes who tried to stop the legendary beast for a long time until he escaped. Lucas gathered fire energy at the tip of his staff, always creating hundreds of crystal stones that rained down on them. Lucas said that he would tell everyone about their brave deeds. At this moment, the plant monster attacked Elijah, so the boy lost focus and fell. Blood came out of Elijah's nose and mouth, indicating that the boy was at the limit of his strength. Right above him, the plant monster prepared to attack. As Elijah closed his eyes and surrendered to the situation, Brauld appeared and burned the arm of the monster. Brauld smiled widely. With a smoldering body, he said the monster would not be able to bully Elijah anymore. Then he boldly challenged the monster to a fight. The legendary monster roared so loudly that it was deafening. It was a duel between the monster and the fiery knight. Despite only using one hand, Brauld did not flinch at all when he had to advance alone against the legendary monster. Everyone had already fallen with horrific body conditions. Arthur coughed as he slowly regained consciousness. Meanwhile, Brauld was still struggling alone to cut the giant monster's body. Although Brauld managed to cut the monster's body in half with his sword full of fire, suddenly the entire plant fused back together to form the monster's body again. The legendary beast looked furious as it stared at Brauld. Unfortunately, blood had already started flowing from its nose, signaling that Brauld had also almost reached his limit. Finally, Brauld could only stand by in resignation as the creepers captured him. Elijah tried to approach Arthur's body. With a weakened condition and foggy eyes, Arthur could see Elijah's badly injured condition and Jasmine's body lying unconscious. Arthur's heart was beating very fast when he saw Lucas' artificial crystal closing the exit door. Brauld, on the other hand, was still trying to fight the monster with what little energy he had left. Inside his head, Arthur realized he had no other choice. Even so, he wondered if he could still live after using that. Arthur's body was badly injured. He was vomiting blood. But suddenly some symbols appeared that lit up brightly all over Arthur's body. The symbols looked amazing and extended all the way to his fingertips and just below his eyes. It turns out that this is the second phase of Arthur's Dragon Will Beast awakening. Arthur's training in Elenware had led to breakthroughs that left the elders of Virion constantly baffled. His first breakthrough had opened up the first phase, Acquire. By utilizing one of Sylvia's innate skills, Arthur was able to temporarily separate himself from time and space. Like on the day of the auction, this phase was very limited as it depended on Arthur's core and physical body. The second breakthrough, however, was something unexpected. What Elder Virion achieved in a matter of decades could be achieved by Arthur in just 2.5 years. This was the integration phase. Suddenly, Arthur's hair turned white, as his entire body was filled with brightly lit symbols. In another dimension, Sylvie could feel the awakening of Arthur. Of course, this worried her. The evolved creature immediately flapped its large wings and flew high. Leaving behind its large prey, it went to meet its father, who was in danger in another dimension. Through telepathic communication, Arthur told Sylvie that he was fine, but for now, Arthur wanted Sylvie to stay away from him. Arthur asked Sylvie to return to the Hulstia family home if anything happens to her. Sylvie refused at first because she wanted to help Arthur. Suddenly, Arthur felt a sharp pain in his chest. Even so, he begged Sylvie to stay away from him. After a few moments of silence, Sylvie finally agreed to comply. Arthur took off the few attributes that felt burdensome on his shoulders. Then he walked to face the monster alone. Arthur stood on the stone shield previously created by Elijah. Then he slowly gathered the ice element while inviting the monster to play. Realizing the powerful opponent in front of him, the monster roared very strongly. Arthur jumped towards the monster while thinking that he didn't blame the Elder Virion for knocking him down the first time. He used the integration phase. Arthur's mouth was bleeding and he was almost at his limit, but either way, Arthur wanted to end this quickly and hoped he could survive the reaction of this phase. Arthur cut off every plant vine that came his way, making the monster even angrier, especially because all the plants would immediately freeze if exposed to Arthur's ice element. In fact, even though Arthur could utilize all the mana around this form, but his body was still not strong enough to withstand the spell. Arthur jumped over the frozen vine to freeze the plants that were coming towards him again. Arthur was in a hurry because his body was barely able to withstand this phase. Arthur jumped straight towards the creature's life center and instantly froze the creature. With all limbs frozen, the legendary beast could only roar in pain. The monstrous creature still tried to attack Arthur until the last second, but luckily, everything froze right before it touched Arthur's body. After all parts of the creature were frozen, Arthur combined two elements at once to create a higher phase of lightning. In fact, the lightning element created by Arthur could turn dark. With that dark lightning, Arthur destroyed the frozen monster. Arthur destroyed the creature to the deepest part of the plant. When everything was destroyed, Arthur fell to the ground with all the holes in his body bleeding. His condition was very weak, and he fell unconscious. Meanwhile, in the town of Cyrus, Alice was confused to see her 8-year-old daughter sleeping on the floor due to exhaustion. Ray held Ellie's body while explaining that it was because, after Lilia got up, Ellie trained hard in order to surpass her. Alice hoped it was only because of that. Ellie's attitude made Alice remember about how Ray managed to come back in those days. Suddenly, Alice dropped the object she was holding, making Ray surprised. It turned out that Alice was in shock seeing the ring on her ring finger glowing reddish. With a pale face, Alice hopes the ring is just broken. Slowly, Arthur opened his eyes, The blood on his face had been cleaned, but he could still feel pain throughout his body. Until finally, Arthur coughed up blood. Elijah's voice sounded loud when he said Note's name. Now Arthur could see Elijah's happy face when he realized he had woken up. With a weak voice, Arthur asked Elijah to destroy one of the crystals in his glove. Elijah immediately carried out Arthur's orders and shattered the small crystal right on Arthur's side. Slowly, healing energy came out of the crystal, healing the wounds all over Arthur's body. Even the previously frozen fingers slowly returned to normal. In this painful state, Arthur remembered the moment when Lucas attacked him mercilessly, then escaped alone at the expense of his entire team. Arthur was furious when he remembered Lucas Wyke's name, but he suddenly remembered Jasmine's condition and got up to look for her. Elijah quickly explained that Jasmine was lying by Arthur's side. The girl was still unconscious. Elijah explained that she had been hit hard by Lucas' spell, and her body was also unprotected by mana. Elijah had basic medicine, so he had already treated the burns on Jasmine's body. But Elijah suspected that there were wounds inside the girl's body. With great effort, Arthur had Elijah take one of the crystals in his glove again, and had Elijah use it on Jasmine. Once again, Elijah followed Arthur's orders without saying much. After the crystal had seeped into Jasmine's body, Elijah could see the girl's breathing begin to normalize. He felt that Jasmine would be fine after a few hours of rest. Arthur could lie down with a sense of relief after hearing the explanation from Elijah. He was truly grateful that his mother gave him that recovery crystal. Arthur smiled at the fact that his condition had never been this bad since he fell off the cliff that time. Even so, he thought it was an exciting time. Elsewhere, Sylvie could sense that Arthur was awake. Sylvie asked if Arthur was okay. Arthur explains that he's fine now. He asks where Sylvie is now. Sylvie explains that she has followed Arthur's orders to return to the Hulsty family while following Lucas. Of course, Sylvie had to keep a safe distance so Lucas wouldn't notice her. Arthur says Sylvie has done a great job. They were out of danger now, so he asked Sylvie to continue her training. But Sylvie replied that it didn't matter now, though Art parted feeling that the training was very important to Sylvie. Arthur asks Sylvie to trust him. After all, they're just resting right now. Arthur asked Sylvie to go do what she had to do. After all, Arthur will see her soon. After Arthur rested, Elijah asked if he was feeling better now. Arthur raised his right arm while trying to wah he was good enough to run the marathon. Elijah chuckled at Arthur's funny behavior. Then they were both lost in their own thoughts. There were still worried and shaken expressions on both boys. Then Elijah said that he never thought that Note, the masked legend who had done the test with him, the statement was a boy his age. Arthur was shocked to hear that. He just realized that the mask had come off. Elijah apologized because the mask fell off during the fight, and Elijah couldn't find the mask. Arthur suddenly woke up when he remembered his sword. He asked Elijah what about his sword. It looked like the black stick he always carried. Elijah pointed to the corner of the room. He didn't know if it was important, but he took all their belongings and put them in the corner of the cave. Arthur could feel relieved now, so he lay down again and sighed heavily. Arthur thanked Elijah sincerely for saving Jasmine and himself, and also for being willing to take their belongings when Elijah could have easily escaped on his own. Arthur really thanked him sincerely. Elijah explained that if he had left Arthur alone in that place, then he would have been the same as Lucas. Arthur chuckled at Elijah's words. He didn't think it would be that bad. Elijah is also curious why Arthur stayed when the Elderwood Guardian appeared. Elijah had seen Jasmine asking him to leave. With a confident smile, Arthur said that a king would never abandon his people. Besides, Arthur had promised someone very important that he would be a better person and respect everyone around him. Arthur remembered Sylvie's face as she smiled at him for the last time. Hearing Arthur's words made Elijah think that Arthur sounded like an old man. But then Elijah realized what kind of life Arthur had lived that he would promise such a thing to someone. Sometimes, Arthur wondered about that too, but he thought it was enough to talk about. Arthur only remembered when he asked how long he had been unconscious. Elijah couldn't be sure either, but he was sure it had been more than a day. Arthur tries to sit up and lean against the cave wall. Arthur says that it looks like they will have to stay there for a while, until Jasmine recovers, and maybe they can use that time to get to know each other. Arthur reached out and introduced himself as Arthur Lewin, but Elijah could call him Art. This means that Arthur considers Elijah one of his close friends. After they got to know each other, Arthur hit the cave wall behind him. He realized that the cave was not natural. Arthur asked if Elijah had made the metal barrier. Elijah looked awkward as he explained that he had intentionally made it look like a cave, because he thought the Elderwood Guardian's body supported the whole cave. Even though Elijah was a deviant, Arthur didn't know that he could manipulate metal, not create or enchant it. That's why Arthur thought Elijah was a dwarf. Elijah smiled, realizing it was too much of a secret. They both chuckled. Then Arthur asked Spell to tell him a little about himself. Elijah was silent for a long time as he thought. Then he made an offer. If Elijah told him something about himself, then Arthur also had to tell him what happened before. Elijah moved closer to Arthur as he watched the young man closely. At that moment, Arthur's hair turned white, and there were glowing symbols all over his body. Moreover, Arthur's eyes suddenly turned purple. Arthur pushed the boy away a little as he was willing to tell him everything. Elijah was the first to start telling his story. Elijah grew up in the dwarf kingdom, so he was not sure about his true origins. The elder Radias, who took care of him, as far as he remembered, always avoided discussing the parents of Elijah, and his childhood memories came in confusing and painful flashes, but he lived normally until he broke through the dark orange stage. After reaching that energy wave, Elijah fainted. When he woke up, he was surrounded by black metal thorns that looked very scary. After all that, the elder Radias told him that it was time to explore Dickaton. Without telling Elijah any reason, everything happened suddenly, and everyone couldn't help but feel this feeling. The young man felt an itchy feeling that he couldn't scratch on his hand. But Elijah was sure it had something to do with his powers and also where he came from. Arthur was silent with a serious face as he listened to Elijah's story. But a sudden snoring sound from Jasmine startled them both. Jasmine was delirious, saying that the fish Arthur was holding was not good, and asked him to taste hers. They both chuckled at Jasmine's behavior. Elijah then says that it's his fault, because he didn't mean to turn this into a weird emotional conversation. Arthur asks him not to worry. Then Elijah asks what about the story Arthur has. At this moment, Arthur began to explain that he was a quadra-elemental wizard with 2 deviations, ice and lightning. Elijah was so surprised to hear this information that he immediately stood up and hit his head against the cave wall. For a moment, Elijah moaned in pain from the bump of his head. He felt that he was already strange enough, but it turned out that Arthur was much stranger than he was. Then Elijah asked what about the marks and discoloration on Arthur's body before. With an awkward smile, Arthur explained that he was also a beast tamer. What Elijah saw that time was when he released his beast will. Elijah was surprised to hear about the will beast, so he asked how old Arthur was. Arthur casually replied that he was only 11 years old since a few months ago. Elijah realized that he was older than Arthur, but then he realized that it wasn't something to be proud of. They both stifled laughter at this fact, but eventually their laughter broke out. The 2 boys enjoyed this quiet moment with a sense of relief. For a moment they danced for breath before finally laughing for a while longer. Suddenly, Arthur felt his body ache again. Elijah looked very worried as he asked if Arthur was okay. Arthur replied that he was fine, but he was pulling out the one remaining healing crystal, always healing his own body with that crystal. The bright light of the crystal made Jasmine open her eyes. She immediately woke up and hugged Arthur. Unexpectedly, Jasmine apologized while crying in Arthur's arms. Jasmine was truly sorry for not being able to take good care of Arthur. Arthur sank into sadness again. He rubbed Jasmine's head, trying to calm her down while telling her that it didn't matter. Arthur is fine now. Jasmine cried out in Arthur's arms when he told her he was not well. Jasmine felt that she had failed Arthur, but the young man said that he was the one who was being stubborn at the time. Arthur felt that he should apologize for dragging Jasmine into the mess. Hugging Jasmine like this, Arthur realized that she was quite small. Arthur remembered that Jasmine used to be taller than him when he was hugging her, but now she was almost drowning in his arms. Suddenly, Arthur winced in pain as the wound returned. Jasmine quickly pulls away from Arthur's embrace. Jasmine asks Elijah if he has their bag, because he has a rescue medicine in the bag. Jasmine hopes that it will heal them both. A short while later, Arthur's body is finished being treated and is completely wrapped in bandages. Arthur felt much better now. He once again thanked the two people in front of him and said that he was feeling much better now. With Elijah's help, Arthur stood up and invited them to return home.